Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy Podcast with Ani and Brian. Join us as we explore the art and science of trauma-sensitive somatic practices and tools to strengthen your practice as a coach, therapist, or holistic professional. Master the art of motivating even the most challenging clients when you'll understand how to tap into and unlock your client's complete holistic intelligence. If you want to learn the most cutting-edge, research-supported skills for personal and professional mastery, you've come to the right place. Let's get this conversation started.
Hi, and welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy Podcast. Hey there, Brian.
Hey, Ani.
We are on episode 18 today. And what are we talking about today, Brian?
Well, first, I'd just like to acknowledge the obvious that it's obviously Vest Day. And neither one of us, I think, we didn't plan this. We both showed up here to record, and we both have our vests on.
Yeah, you're in like different shades of gray, and I'm in different shades of color, which I think is really...
That's the way it normally works.
It is.
Yeah, so we are a mind melding, as always, and kind of showing up and perfectly attuned with one another and all those sorts of things. All right, we do digress. So we are here today.
Like
Today's
a bicycle built for two, you know
all
what I mean?
the time.
It's ridiculous.
All the time. Okay, today we are talking about querying about, questioning, wondering if a mindset coach can be helpful in solving your imposter syndrome.
We have so many clients who come to us self-proclaiming that they have imposter syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like it's a disease or something.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because, I have people self-proclaim they have all kinds of things, actually. And I do ask people if they've been diagnosed. Like people will say, I have anxiety, I have ADHD, whatever it is. And I will ask them if they've been diagnosed because I am actually interested in how they're thinking about what they're experiencing. Because is it something that like a doctor diagnosed for you, or is this something that you're proclaiming about yourself? Which I think right there is really interesting, when we have an experience and then we self-proclaim a diagnosis, which to some degree can be helpful and harmful, right? Because in some ways, it can kind of help us understand what might be going on and normalize it. And in other ways, it can totally keep us in a box.
It's really interesting. I mean, one of the reasons I love doing podcasts with you, Ani, because it always gives me ideas for more podcasts. And the idea that you just gave me was this idea of diagnosis and having something validated externally from someone we consider a quote unquote expert that puts something on us. And then what do we do with it then?
Sure. Because I really have seen it work both ways.
Absolutely.
Totally solid, which is, we're talking about mindset today, which I think is a tenet of mindset work. Actually, we need to be able to decide how we're using information and things that happen because from a mindset perspective, there's no right or wrong way to approach something. It's, is it working for your mindset?
Yeah. And anytime we slap a label on someone's experience, it immediately coalesces that entire experience into a box.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So, we I think sort of like to avoid labels.
Well, we do as humans, and we do philosophically. And I've also seen the label really work for somebody to be able to get to the next step and where they're going, and then decide if the label is helpful or not helpful for them. But yeah, philosophically, you and I definitely are not label people.
So since we digressed again, by the way.
Well, we did.
But let's talk about the label of imposter syndrome. So let's bring this back to this idea of label of imposter syndrome. And where did this come from? If you look on Google, there's millions and millions and millions of searches on imposter syndrome.
Highly searched.
So
it's not a thing though, Brian. Like why do we call it a syndrome?
Well, here's
that medicalizes it.
Well, I would love to read a quote for you from the Harvard Business Review.
Okay.
And so here's the quote from the Harvard Business Review article. It says, psychologists Pauline Rose Clancy and Suzanne Imes developed the concept originally termed imposter phenomenon.
Oh, see, that's so much better.
in their 1978 founding study.
78?
1978, which
It's that
focused
old,
on
huh?
high-achieving women. They
Really?
posited that despite outstanding academic and professional accomplishments, women who experience the imposter phenomenon persist into believing that they are really not bright and have fooled anyone who thinks otherwise.
That makes perfect freaking sense to me, being a woman raised in our society. Because of our conditioning as women, it makes perfect sense.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
Yeah.
And I know you want to kind
It's
of
that old?
Yeah, I know you want to kind of share another story that kind of talks about this too, but before, I want to just note this point that originally it was called imposter phenomenon and not syndrome. So I don't know when it turned from phenomenon into syndrome, because as soon as you use the word syndrome, you pathologize the experience. You make the experience a disease, really, because that's syndromes are associated with pathology, correct?
I just heard the most incredible thing on NPR about nostalgia. Brian, did you hear the
No.
thing recently about nostalgia? Nostalgia is like this emotion that we experience, but it actually used to be a diagnosis that they diagnose soldiers. So I'm just reminded about how in our history we have, decided to either medicalize something or not medicalize something, and how that affects us because of how we think about it. I think syndrome is just a terrible word to put and associated with this. The story that you were talking about that I had on my mind, Reshma did an amazing. It wasn't a keynote. What do you
It's
call
a TED
it?
Talk, I think.
No, it wasn't a TED Talk. What do you call it when a commencement speech at Smith College? It's so great. You could look up Smith College commencement imposter syndrome or bicycle face, and you'll find it. She was talking about how there was this other medicalized phenomenon back in the day when bicycles came out. Man, I love this story. Shout out to my college roommate who sent me this link, Jenny Lee. Thanks, Jenny. So bicycle face was this phenomenon that I don't know who doctors decided was a thing, because when the bicycle came out, it wasn't meant for women, but women started using bicycles and were exercising freedoms that they didn't have. And some people didn't like that. And so they coined this term bicycle face as a medical problem. And bicycle face had symptomology associated with like red cheeks, flushed, right? Like, I don't remember the other ones. I think my mind just stopped working. I was so upset at flushed cheeks. These things that are, raised heartbeat, normal when you ride a bike. But they pathologicalized it. That's not a word.
Pathologized it.
There you go. Because they didn't want women riding bikes. And so they came up with this bicycle face thing, which when we hear it now, I think, really? Bicycle face? Whoever bought that? But of course we did, because the experts in our society were talking about it. And anyway, Reshma, who is the founder of Moms First and Girls Who Code and is an awesome influencer, was likening imposter syndrome and talking about how it's not actually a thing to this concept of bicycle face, which also was a thing people thought was a thing, but it wasn't a real thing. And how harmful that was for women.
How manipulative and how degrading and how debasing, and how a lot of that has to do, I think, obviously with the patriarchy. We joke about
the patriarchy.
We joke about that in our house. But the idea that to disempower women, really, essentially, we can talk about that for a really, really long time.
Yeah.
But hopefully people are already kind of getting the sense that in the work that we do at the Somatic Coaching Academy and with our private clients, we do a lot of mindset coaching with people.
Okay, so now we got to talk about that one too, Brian, because when we talk about mindset, we come from a different place around what that means, because we don't conceptualize that the mind is between the two ears. So our our philosophy and the way that we approach mindset work is a full body / full intelligence kind of way of going about it. I don't know how anybody does mindset work without having somatic work. And of course, from my philosophy, I would think that, because the mind includes the body, it includes the nervous system, the mind includes the emotions. Of course, we can tap into collective intelligence when we can tap into our body and emotions and our spiritual nature when we do those things. So it's a very holistic view of mind. So I think when we talk about mindset coaching or mindset coaches, we're actually coming from a place of reference of that person being a somatic trained coach.
Agreed. 100%. Mind is information. Mind is information, and that information can be sourced from anything in our experience.
So this is really interesting because we're talking about mindset coaching. We're talking about imposter syndrome and this idea that this phenomenon, is that the word you used?
Originally, it was coined as a phenomenon, not a syndrome.
Yeah. So that so many women had it, and now we still see so many women have it. And it actually reminds me, I was just saying about tapping into the collective intelligence. Like, that's what we're doing when we buy in to these things. We see so many people out there, and we're actually buying into the collective intelligence. And then we feel it in our own bodies, we feel it in our own bodies, and we think, it's true for me. Why do we think it's true? Because we feel it. And what we feel, we think is real.
That's a whole other really interesting segue.
Podcast.
Yeah, there's a wonderful book. One of my favorite books is called The Sickening Mind. And I can't recall the author's name right now, but the author goes back does a historical review of how different diseases have gained popularity, if you will.
Yeah.
Like more people, like ulcers, for instance. Like ulcers were a thing, and they became a huge thing. Everybody had ulcers, and then ulcers went away. And then something else, low back pain, become a huge thing, and then everything going all the way back to like starting with disease processes that happened in the medieval times. Kind of went back and a process. And one of the things that we really understood, or that jumped out to me from that work, is that as humans, we are so deeply programmed for conformity.
Yeah.
Because conformity equals safety.
And staying alive.
And staying alive and safety, that we will, in order to fit in, we will auto-generate diseases in our bodies that conform to everyone else's disease experience.
Absolutely.
And so we actually will, and that is one of these causations or correlations with a rising of certain diseases, is because we're manufacturing it in order to conform, which is happening on a subconscious
It's happening subconsciously.
level.
We're not doing it consciously, but we can, especially with things like imposter syndrome, begin to use our conscious mind to look at what's going on in our subconscious mind, to then start excavating and making decisions about who we really want to be. I'm just laughing at myself as you're talking about conformity, and we're sitting here in matching outfits.
Okay, yeah, exactly. There you go. All subconscious. Well,
Carolyn Mace talks about that, by the way, too, in her books. I don't remember which one, but she talks about that idea of the kind of collective disease processes that become popularized.
Yeah. So that's the thing.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
And that's happening with imposter syndrome, which is not a disease.
It's not even a disease. So it's just one
we're
more.
calling it a syndrome.
It's just really interesting how a thing can be made up, and a thing that's made up specifically to disempower women. And then the power of collective conformity causes more women to believe that they have imposter syndrome, which just empowers more women and people in that regard. And if we just kind of like break down imposter syndrome for a second,
sure.
All the research I kind of looked at in imposter syndrome is saying, well, if it is a syndrome,
what are the symptoms?
What are the symptoms of it? Because syndromes have symptoms. That's how you
have symptoms. I would love to hear this.
Right. So what are the symptoms? Like the symptoms of bicycle face, where flushed cheeks and elevated heart rate.
Right. Exactly.
So what are the symptoms of imposter syndrome? Well, there are things like anxiety, uncertainty, self-doubt.
Yeah. Okay.
which, by the way, everybody experiences those things, especially when they're in situations that are new.
When they're in situations that are new.
And we're growing. When people are in situations that are new and unfamiliar, and we're learning and we're growing and we're gaining competencies as we go along. There's we're just like quoting books today, but there's this great book, Mastery, also by George Leonard, I believe is the author of Mastery. And he talks about how mastery actually occurs in very brief, short intervals of spikes. And for the majority of the time, we are living on plateaus. Like our skill sets or whatever it is that we're growing. We spend most of the time on a plateau, and then we'll short spike, and then we'll live for a very, very long time at a plateau again, a short spike. And it's it's a wonderful little book.
Yeah.
And it's really super powerful.
I love that Mastery is a little book.
It's a little book. It's a little book. It's not very complicated.
That's the paradox at work.
And the idea is that when we're living on that plateau is when we are learning, when we are growing, when we're transforming. Like the evidence isn't there yet, but this is where the uncertainty occurs. This is where the anxiety happens. This is where the self-doubt occurs, because we are integrating, we're facilitating, and that's not abnormal.
No,
everyone experiences those things.
It's not. The thing is, are we going to move through? Are we going to move past? Are we going to get stuck? And are we going to label and say, I have imposter syndrome? I have two other things that I heard recently that I think are really pivotal to this conversation right here now. Adam Grant was talking with Oprah about imposter syndrome, and he said that they've done some research, and I don't remember the name of the researcher who he said did this, that when you think that your capabilities aren't quote unquote good enough for whatever it is that the thing is, that you should actually pay attention to the people's opinions around you who know you and are looking from an outside observer standpoint at what's going on, because they're more accurate.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
They're more accurate about your capabilities, and we should listen to them. Similar story actually also from Reshma that I heard recently on her Instagram feed that was I loved. And since we're talking about the patriarchy, I'm bringing it up. She was saying that she's in really powerful rooms with really, really powerful people. And she will meet a world leader or CEO of a company, and she'll think to herself when she meets this person, she gets to know them, like you're in charge? Like, how are you in charge? Because as women, we do all these things in our minds and in our bodies, that this self-doubt and stuff. And then it's actually really healthy, similar to what Adam Grant said, to see other people who are doing the things we want to do and in the positions that we want to be in, and actually meet them and actually get to know them. And then we get to see that this built up person archetype that we think we need to be in order to be, do, or have that thing is actually not as big of a deal as we think it is. So meeting those people or putting ourselves in positions and seeing, who's actually doing these things actually helps us to realize, so can I.
Yeah, humanizing it, really understanding that we're all humans. Well,
I'm taking it there for a moment. Women aren't necessarily conditioned to believe that they are on the same level as all humans and human beings. So, we have these things in our conditioning, and that's what I'm saying about, first of all, deciding whether or not we want to call ourselves having something like a syndrome, right? But then using our conscious mind to actually look into our subconscious and say, what's in there that I might want to excavate and look at and potentially change? And mindset and mindset coaching can absolutely do that, especially when there's somatic components to it.
Yes.
What, are we done now?
Yes.
Is that it?
just giving you space. You're on a roll here.
Oh, thank
I'm just
you.
giving you space.
I can get on a roll.
To come
about
to
this.
a point of relative completion with the point you're making.
I am complete.
Okay. So can we segue kind of into like how a mindset coach or a somatic mindset coach could be helpful to somebody with imposter syndrome?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing which we've spent a little bit of time hopefully covering is to help people understand that if you experience things like anxiety and self-doubt and uncertainty, is that you're not broken.
Nope.
That's the very first thing I'd like to say is that you're not broken.
Yeah, actually your body is working. So do you have like a step-by-step process you're going to be laying out for us here? I don't want to mess up your step-by-step, but
No, not necessarily.
okay, great. So, looking at what those symptomologies actually feel like in the body as sensations help us to break down the narratives that we're telling ourselves. And breaking down narratives can be so exceptionally hard because what we're talking about is breaking down something we cannot touch and feel. But working with the sensations are tangible. So when the mindset coach actually helps the person, when the somatic mindset coach, please don't do this unless you have somatic training because you could open up a Pandora's box you don't want opened. When the somatic mindset coach helps a person to tap into their sensations, all of a sudden they can actually disentangle the narrative and help people to become aware of what's really going on.
Exactly. That was exactly the point that I was going to make.
Well, that's
Right.
That's great.
A somatic mindset coach is going to help someone to become aware of the actual phenomenon that's going on that they're calling imposter syndrome.
Right.
Right. What are the components of it? Decode it. Help to understand, well, not only what was its origin, but what is its relationship contextually to the outside world.
Yeah, like the other places things like this show up. One of the things I'm most fascinated with our clients and students is when they notice a sensation in their body, for example, to notice other places where that shows up.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we'll see, oh my gosh, I'm having like the same experience over here, but this is completely different. Or we'll notice like, wow, the sensation over here is the same, but I'm making it mean something totally different. What is it about this context that I'm making it mean something over here? And I think, with imposter syndrome and the origins of imposter syndrome and things, women showing up and women being in leadership positions and taking charge and things like that, it makes sense actually that would be part of the context that then we would label those things as imposter syndrome, even though if we felt those sensations the morning before when we were making breakfast, we wouldn't make the same meaning out of it.
Which is why that decoding part is so important.
It really
for
is.
Everything that you just said, Ani, because there's so many layers to these things. And as humans, the way our nervous system functions is our nervous system is going to try to throw things into big buckets.
Right.
Of understanding instead of small files.
That's how we work.
And that's just how our nervous system works. So we're going to bucket things into things like, oh, imposter syndrome. Oh, this is this thing or that's that thing.
And that makes perfect sense that our body minds would work like that because we're very efficient systems.
Correct.
Like, bravo, body. Thank you.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It's all about efficiency. It's all about, because if our nervous system was taking all that time to break it down and like we'd be stuck in the mud forever.
Dude, especially nowadays with the pace of our lives, the technology has accelerated. All of us just want to break. Like, thank goodness our bodies are managing these things so masterfully.
Yes. Become aware of, decode are those first two steps that a somatic mindset coach is going to help you with.
Which is not therapy.
Not therapy.
The decode in coaching is different and helpful. Yeah.
And then we pivot to that modify frame where we're working with whatever raw materials of mind information that we are experiencing. We modify that into something that we can use to move in the direction we do want to go.
Yeah.
And then that last step of reframe is where we take that information and we plant it in a fertile field of consciousness or intention, actualized direction in order to get the thing that we want to be able to get in the world.
Yeah. A lot of coaches try to jump to the reframe period first. And the modify is so important because it helps your client have an actual different embodied experience, because we could reframe something intellectually, but somebody is not going to be able to take it up and quote unquote buy it. Right. unless they've had an embodied experience.
Can we do just a really quick example of the reframe that I believe you're describing?
Yeah, sure.
So imagine we're sitting together.
We
don't have
are.
to imagine because we are.
Yeah.
And
that's
you
happening.
and you said to me, boy, Brian, I'm really experiencing a lot of imposter syndrome right now.
Yeah. Okay.
So go ahead and say that.
Okay.
Role play.
Okay. Here we go. Brian, I'm really experiencing a lot of imposter syndrome right now.
Ani, just imagine all the things that you're really, really good at.
Yeah. Okay.
That's jumping to the reframe.
Right. By the way,
that's jumping over everything.
And just,
highly
invalidating.
Reframe it, right? So there's no validation there.
Yeah.
There's no understanding what's really going on.
Yeah.
It's like,
and by the way, my first thought was, what, like doing the dishes? Like, right? That was interesting, little bubbling up from my subconscious.
You know, the image I just got is like if there's like a weed growing in your garden and you just cut off the top and you tape a flower to the top of the weed, right? That's basically what that kind of reframing is kind of like.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thanks for playing that with me.
Yeah. No problem. And okay, quick sidebar on this is then a lot of times what the coach will say is that person either isn't coachable or, you know, like what's the matter with them that they can't just do the reframe, and maybe this person isn't my ideal client and all of those things. But like you said, the taping the flower to the weed kind of thing. We jumped steps, man. Jumped steps.
Okay, now what I'd really love to turn to right now with our conversation, Ani, is to talk about.
Wait, you did the reframe, but you're going to do a modify, or we don't have time for that today?
No, yeah, that's not what we're doing here today.
Okay.
So what we're doing here today is we want to talk about.
You left me hanging, but you know, I know my tools, so I'm good.
Okay, you're good. So now I'm all.
I'm sorry. What were you saying?
Thank you. So what we really want to talk about is that you and I work a lot with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial business owners. Yeah. And a lot of the people we work with say, I'm experiencing imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And one of the places it shows up the most, absolutely the most for people, where it's the most debilitating, these experiences of, let's normalize it, anxiety, uncertainty, self-doubt,
sure,
where they show up primarily are in sales conversations.
Yeah, well, that makes sense because the person wants to grow their business and they need to put themselves out there as an expert, have conversations where they feel like the expert so they can be in a position to help a person. And they're having self-doubt about that, which again, makes perfect sense, especially when you're first starting out, or especially when you're starting a new program that you haven't done before, or you're talking to somebody you haven't talked to before, or you're talking to somebody you've talked to 1,000,000 times before, but in a different context, and on and on and on, right?
Correct.
So of course you would have those kinds of things happening in your body and your mind. And yeah, one of the things that we do with our students, actually, we teach high ticket sales at the Somatic Coaching Academy to our students. Not that every single one of our students is going to be high ticket sales, you know, have high ticket offers, but it helps to really set them up with the confidence and the knowledge that they know how to have a really powerful sales conversation.
And I even like to say the integrity too, Ani, because from what I've talked to people about imposter phenomenon.
Yeah.
I'm going to switch it. I'm going to switch it now,
yeah.
right? Imposter phenomenon is this idea of feeling like a fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Like what they're offering, they can't fulfill on somehow, or that what they're saying isn't true. Like there's kind of that idea.
Absolutely.
So this idea of in that sales conversation, being able to help someone have a conversation where they feel in full integrity with the conversation. That's a really important feature.
Well, we don't call it a sales conversation. We call it an influential conversation. And the way that we contextualize it really, really bottom line is that each of us is already at any time, always in the way of influence. And it's not about trying to convince anybody to work with me or anything. It's really helping somebody to get clear on the decision that they want to make. And I love so much the light bulbs that happen with our students because they think about the influential conversation, and some of them just think, "Oh God," right?
It's the hardest lesson for some people.
For some people, it is. We see their faces, where they might go off camera for a few seconds and kind of gather themselves and come back. And then literally once, they literally try it once and they report back in Slack, "Oh my gosh, I did the influential conversation." And they literally do not care what happened from like the result of it, which is the point to not be attached to the outcome. And they have a fantastic time. The conversation we usually have out there in life is one that talks about our problems rather than our possibilities. And so you become a sought after expert and somebody who another person feels they can lean in on and is inspiring and influential when you have a conversation that actually puts another person into a frame of reference of possibility rather than problems. I mean, it's just a great conversation to have, when you meet people at the grocery store or whatever, in the coffee shop, not just when you're selling your services.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a great way to be.
And there are key features of that conversation that help to transform that imposter phenomenon, that sense of feeling like a fraud. And one of them you pointed out very wonderfully is the idea of having the conversation based around possibilities and not problems. One of my favorite features of that conversation is really learning and mastering the capability of being detached from the outcome.
Yeah.
Of not being attached to the outcome of the conversation. I think that's one of the secret fuels that keeps imposter phenomenon lit, is that we are so attached to what the outcome of the conversation is supposed to be that then we feel ourselves coming off of our base, where we could slip into a slippery slope of saying something that actually isn't in integrity, which then would feed back to us, we are a fraud.
Yeah.
So we kind of fall, but that attachment, letting go of the attachment to the outcome of the conversation, is a key feature that we work with people somatically to help them let go of that attachment in their body mind. So not in just their thinking, but actually in their physiology. And that's a key important shift of being able to have a conversation where you are really, truly, authentically confident.
Well, another thing that women are especially conditioned to do is to be attached to what someone else thinks, because we're taught what you think of me matters because I need to modify myself to be a good girl or to help the situation or whatever. So being detached or unattached from the judgment of others, which is something that, like, I think every woman who's come to see me would be something that they would say, I would love to figure out how to do that in my subconscious mind, so that non-detachment is so, God, it's so liberating, Brian. It's so liberating. And
the conversations too, by the way, and you've noted this as well, that these influential conversations, you can have them anywhere. That learning a conversation like this, again, is not only extremely necessary and effective in your business, but also in your partnerships, in your close partnerships,
100%.
in your family partnerships. And it actually spreads across your whole life. The power of being able to have a really clean, clear, curious, compassionate conversation with another human being and still be able to stand on your own 2 feet, have your own space, and have your own healthy boundaries that you are facilitating. And that really creates such a powerful person to be able to do that. And we love teaching this conversation method in our certification program, but also in our live events. We love doing it there as well.
Yeah, people love it. People love it. Hey, as we're winding up from this episode, Brian, I think this is a really good time to shout out to anyone listening who knows this is a problem for people in your community, your friends, your family, whatever. This is a episode to post on social media. I encourage you actually to go to our website and get the link to it so that you can see the show notes, because in the show notes, we'll have the links to the books that we were referencing and the other things that we were referencing, like we'll put Reshma's link in there and stuff. And then you and your community can have resources to have this conversation. I think that the way that we dismantle imposter syndrome is, first of all, starting to have a conversation about not calling it a syndrome anymore. And we can all help each other with that. So share up this conversation if it was meaningful for you. And we look forward to having another meaningful conversation with you on the next episode.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope that this conversation will help you improve your practice and change the way you think about your work, your clients, and yourself. Continue your exploration of trauma-sensitive somatic coaching by listening to more podcast episodes at somaticcoachingacademy.com. You could be the trusted guide that people turn to help them with their most challenging situations and to reach their most precious goals. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.